Objects created by human labor mediate culture, and as we learn to utilize them through socially developed methods, we shape our minds.
Вещи, созданные человеческим трудом, опосредуют культуру. И когда мы учимся их использовать посредством развитых обществом методов, мы формируем наше сознание.
Mecheryakov writes, "A child's mind takes shape and develops as a result of its interaction with the world of things and the world of people. The things with which a child interacts are the products of human labor. The essence of interaction with things and people consists in the fact that in both cases, this is interaction with a human factor."
Пишет Мещеряков.
Activity with objects is essential for the development of the human mind. This understanding is attributed to Marx's idea that for an individual being, the appropriation of the object is the appropriation of human reality, and that through the human activity of transforming nature, he transforms himself.
Это осуществление на деле человеческой действительности. Он также пишет, что деятельное изменение природы человеком изменяет его самого.
The example of the spoon as an initial and essential object is reoccurring in both Ilyenkov and Mecheryakov. A spoon is an object of human culture, with which a specific mode of action is firmly linked. It dictates a specific action to the child, and when he learns this action and performs it, the child is performing an act of human behavior.
Ложка – предмет человеческой культуры. За ней закреплен определенный способ действия. Она диктует ребенку определенное действие. Обучаясь этому действию и совершая его, ребенок совершает акт человеческого поведения, пишет Мещеряков.
The spoon is a first step on the path of mental development and a first cultural tool. Ilyenkov writes, "A spoon is a path into the realm of human social culture, into the sphere of human life activity and of the human mind."
Ложка – это и есть пропуск в царство человеческой социальной культуры, в сферу человеческой жизнедеятельности и психики, пишет Ильенков.
He later continues, as Mecheryakov liked to repeat, "If you have managed to teach a child to use a spoon in human fashion, then all of the remaining human development of this child is simply a matter of technique and patience. By learning to use a spoon, he has already obtained a path both into the world of human thinking and into the world of language. That is, into the world of Kant, Dostoevsky, and Michelangelo." This leads Mecheryakov to pose the following question. If learning to use a spoon and other everyday objects renders a child human, then why do not similar skills, when they are developed in animals, such as monkeys, transform animal behavior into human behavior? Why do they not render animals human? Can you describe Ilyenkov and Mechelyakov's concept of the social meaning of objects and how they relate to the development of the mind? How does the example of the spoon reveal a universal process?
Как в примере с ложкой обнаруживается этот универсальный процесс?
у слепоглухонемых от рождения и раннего детства никаких вообще поведенческих стереотипов не обнаруживается. Из этого общепризнанного факта также исходит Мещеряков.
From birth to early childhood, deaf-blind children display no complex behavioral patterns at all. Meshcheryakov also acknowledges this well-known fact. He explains this very simply. No activity is observed because there is no activity. The activity of the deaf and blind has to be shaped. It will not appear by itself, because there is simply nothing to make it develop.
Мещеряков и Ельденков солидаризируются со всей психологической школой Выгодского, усматривая в критерии.
Meshcheryakov and Ilyenkov are in complete agreement with the Vygotsky school, which considers the criteria of human activity, as opposed to zoological activity, to be the fact that the human being, as distinct from the animal, uses objects not present in a usable form in nature, but specially made to serve one or another purpose, whether this is a spoon, speech, or some sort of special language or code.
Педагог берет эту ручонку свою детской ручонкой, которая зовет ложка, пытается зачерпнуть пищу из тарелки. Педагог в буквальном смысле слова руководит.
The spoon is placed in the child's hand, and the teacher takes the child's hand in his own, and using the hand with the spoon clutched in it, tries to pick up some food from the bowl. The teacher guides the child's hand. This is the first step in the shared action of teacher and child.
Позволяет собой руководить и, наконец, развивает, пытается, пусть и неуклюже, слазить с ложкой самостоятельно.
Ilyenkov observed this procedure a number of times. First the child's hand resisted, then it became guidable, obedient, passive, permitting itself to be guided, and finally it came to life. There were 2 broad windows, each on the outer 2 walls, and within this rectangle there were 12 ordinary one-piece desks. 3 such desks constituted a class, meaning there were actually 4 classes, 4 groups of 3 pupils each in the biology classroom. Each group's desks were pulled together in a C shape, so that the teacher who sat inside the C could reach out and touch each of the 3 pupils. The bedrooms for the students contained 6 or 7 beds each. In my final years there, my bedroom was the smallest. It had 4 beds. Instead of the 5th, there was an ordinary school desk at which I would work in the evenings. I wrote school essays and other stuff on a Braille typewriter. I still have dreams about that building. My eyesight abruptly deteriorated when I was 4. The abrupt deterioration of my hearing was detected when I was 10. I have never been able to distinguish colors in waking life, so I cannot distinguish them in dreams. However, for a long time I could make out the shapes of surrounding objects. Now I cannot, but sometimes this ability comes back in my dreams. When I was brought to the boarding school, it had existed less than a year. It opened in October 1963. It was all new, one big experiment, and there was no bureaucracy. I understand now that I was happy there, the only way one can be happy.
Do you remember when Mecheryakov brought Ilyenkov to the school for the first time?
Вы помните, когда Мещеряков привез Ильенкова в школу в первый раз?
В последнюю пятницу мая 1968 года в педагогическом кабинете
On the last Friday of May 1968, a teletactor, a device for communicating with several deaf-blind people at the same time, was set up in the biology classroom. We sat around the central console, which was manned by the person who wanted to speak to us all.
Судя по крепкому запаху табака, за пультом сидел тот самый дядя.
Someone was sitting at the desk opposite me, someone who smelled of strong tobacco.
Этим дядей был Богданков. Он подвергался в Загорске, обычно вместе с Мещеряковым.
The someone was Ilyenkov. He would show up in Zagorsk, usually along with Mesheryakov, as often as he could, but would sometimes disappear for several months. I was always waiting for him. While we were still university students, several of Ilyenkov's main works and his articles on Mesheryakov's pedagogical methods were reprinted for us on Braille typewriters. Marxism exists for me primarily in Ilyenkov's version. I read Marx, Lenin, and Spinoza through Ilyenkov's eyes, perceiving and contemplating them from his stance. This interpretation is quite distant from the semi-official Soviet interpretation, even antagonistic to it in some ways. Ilyenkov and his fellow thinkers were agreed among themselves that it was not Marxism of any sort that had triumphed in the Soviet Union, but positivism. To my mind, there were no Marxists in the Politburo. First of all, I adopted Ilyenkov's theory of talent, and with it all the other content of his work. So for me, the most important thing in Ilyenkov's work is the idea that consciousness, including talent, is acquired through the process of formation and purposeful activity, rather than being genetically innate. Humans are not born persons, but become persons in the process of living, meaning in the process of acting as persons in the course of a lifetime.
именно становление личности в процессе ее человеческой, родовой, социальной жизнедеятельности
It was the
интересовали
emergence of the
Ельянкова
person in
вообще,
the process of
и
its
в том числе
individual, species, and social
фактическое
life
подтверждение
that interested
чисто
Ilyenkov generally,
педагогики.
including its clearest confirmation
Всегда
in
хотел
deafblind
быть
psychology.
полноценным не в слепоглухих, а в общечеловеческих пределах. И тут меня очень выручало понимание
I had always
Ельянкова
wanted to be a
не
full-fledged
только
person
проблемы
in
специфики
universal rather
психики,
than deaf-blind
но
terms,
прежде
and
всего
here I was given a
проблемы
huge helping
талантов.
hand by the way
Талант
Ilyenkov
– это
understood
то,
not only the
что можно
specifics of
сформировать
deaf-blindness,
болезненно,
but above
а
all,
не то,
the problem
что
of talent,
существует от
that it is
рождения.
something that can be formed during one's lifetime, and not something biologically innate. Ilyenkov begins his essay What is a Person, which was written right before his death, as follows. So what is a person, and where does it come from? It is hardly scholastic considerations that prompt me once again to ask myself this old question, and turn to an analysis of the concept of personality. The fact is that the answer to this question is immediately bound up with the problem of forming on a mass scale a personality of a new, communist type. Of course, such a radical shift in emphasis objectively made Ilyenkov the founder and head of a whole trend in Marxism. That is, from the semi-official viewpoint, he was a revisionist.
The development of consciousness occurs as the individual is confronted with activity from the outside, from other individuals, culture, and society at large. Ilyenkov writes, "It is only in these conditions that the individual is compelled to distinguish himself from his own organic body. Consciousness only arises where the individual is compelled to look at himself from the outside, as if with the eyes of another person, the eyes of all other people, only where he is compelled to correlate his individual actions with the actions of another person, that is to say, only within the framework of collectively performed life activity. As such, following Marx, human essence is the ensemble of all social relations.
Только там, где он вынужден соразмерять свои индивидуальные действия с действиями другого человека, то есть только в рамках совместно осуществляемой жизнедеятельности, пишет Ильенков. Согласно Марксу, человеческая сущность в своей действительности есть ансамбль всех общественных отношений.
В марксизме Ильденков перенес акцент с диктатуры пролетариата.
Ilyenkov shifted the emphasis in Marxism from the dictatorship of the proletariat to the formation of the full-fledged, harmoniously developed person, to the construction of communism as a society of total universal giftedness.
Лишь политическая предпосылка условия, чтобы такое строительство стало возможным.
The dictatorship of the proletariat is only the political precondition that makes this construction possible. Ilyenkov was to become disenchanted with this premise. He was forced to keep this disappointment to himself, but in one of our conversations it came out.
Читая государство и революцию Ленина и материальность съездов КПСС, я обратил внимание на...
Once, while sitting in Ilyenkov's kitchen, I burst into the following tirade. While reading Lenin's State and Revolution and Party Congress proceedings, I noticed that the subject of these proceedings was always developing and strengthening the state, albeit under the label socialist. According to Lenin, however, any state is a machine for oppression, a machine for the domination of some groups in society by other groups. The state is a repressive apparatus for implementing this domination, and it should gradually wither away. The gradual withering away of the state as a repressive apparatus in the course of building communism. But if you develop and strengthen the state, it is unlikely to wither away by itself, I concluded. Ilyenkov listened to my reflections, his head down, all shrunk into himself somehow. But when I came to the conclusion that the state was unlikely to wither away under its own power, Ilyenkov suddenly jumped up and, vigorously finger-spelling, confirmed my thought. It won't wither away, the beast. Ilyenkov made it clear that he was disappointed in the existing Soviet state as the political precondition of communism. But he could never be disappointed in communism as a society consisting of harmoniously developed persons, a society of total giftedness. Once one has accepted this idea, it is impossible to give up on it, to abandon it, except by abandoning one's own life, along with it, which is what Ilyenkov eventually did by committing suicide.
Революция, которую Ильденков совершил в марксизме,
The revolution that Ilyenkov made in Marxism was to shift the emphasis from the political preconditions of communism to communism itself, to its psychological and pedagogical construction.
Ильденков был прежде всего космистом. Это значит, что он мыслил с точки зрения человечества как разумной формы жизни.
He was primarily cosmist. This means that he thought in terms of humanity as an intelligent form of life, in terms of the person as a rational being. He thought like a Spinozist, in terms of the thinking body, which exists where the attributes of thought and extension dialectically coincide. If we turn to the economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844, we see that Marxism is actually a cosmist theory. What is at issue is the cosmic problem of humanity's alienation from itself, the problem of humanity's dehumanization. For Marx, however, class struggle was a historically transitory means of overcoming alienation. It was not yet another redistribution of property, but humanity's discovery of the entire universal fullness of its relations with the world, the attainment at last of rationality, and thus the end of prehistory and the beginning of history, the cosmic history of a cosmic, universally intelligent form of life. Private property is to blame for the fact that it reduces every possible relationship humanity has with the rest of the world to one and only one relationship, that of possession. A person can and should be a universal being, a thinking being sensitive to goodness and beauty, but possession makes them envious and nothing more. Our childhood as university students was ending, and with it a glorious era in science was vanishing into the past. I had to remain faithful to that era. Renouncing it meant renouncing myself.
В конце перестройки мне Ильденкова остро не хватало. Я очень нуждался в два поддержки.
At the end of Perestroika, I sorely missed Ilyenkov. I really needed his support at a time when official pseudo-Marxism was collapsing. The times had changed in academia. Big science's keen interest in the Zagorsk experiment had faded. The dominant positivist paradigm had thrown off its Marxist mask.
Короче, Загорский эксперимент кончился. Власти пришли те, против кого
In short,
этот
the
эксперимент
Zagorsk school
был
experiment
оправдан.
had ended. The
Свидетельство
people against
российской
whom this
дословия
experiment had been aimed
на самом
in the
деле
theoretical sense
Загорский
had taken
эксперимент,
power.
когда
In
кончился,
fact, the Zagorsk
в момент
experiment
окончания
ended when our
четвертого
quartet finished
университета.
university. Then each of us had to live in his or her own way.
Каждый жить по-своему. Я ни в какие партии решил больше не вступать. Решил, что я сам себе партия.
I decided I would not join any parties anymore. I decided I was my own party, like Marx and Engels, who were of course convinced communists, theorists of communism, before they joined the Communist League. The point is not membership, after all, but outlook.
Я испытываю глубочайшее разочарование до человечества. Судя по тому, что творится в Украине, далеко нам до разумности.
Right now, I am profoundly disappointed with humanity. Judging by what is happening in Ukraine, we are far from being intelligent. Of course, according to Marx, until communism is built, humanity has no history, only prehistory. Consequently, humanity as such does not exist. In fact, as long as prehistory continues.
Но вот вопрос, начнут ли когда-нибудь превалировать общечеловеческий «я», общепланетный «я», а не русско-национальные интересы? Станет ли когда-нибудь человечество человечеством? Начнется ли его история?
But the question is, will universal planetary interests ever begin to prevail rather than narrow national interests? Will humanity become humanity someday? Will its history ever commence? Or will we perish in prehistoric convulsions, continuing from the birth pangs in which a social structure worthy of an intelligent life form is born, to the agony of a dying biological species? There is no humanity in the sense of an intelligent life form. There are no persons in the sense of intelligent beings. What there has been, and else will be in the foreseeable future, is a bestial community of enviers.